Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Hope you're having a fantastic Thursday morning. Our next guest, always a pleasure to visit with our next guest, former White House physician and also a Republican candidate for Texas 13, joining us on the phones, Dr. Ronny Jackson. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to hear from you once again, and I know the campaign is rocking along there in the Texas 13th. And how are things moving along in your race?
Everything's going great. You know, we're just now getting to where we're putting the plan together to get back out there and start with some of the traditional campaigning. Everybody's excited about going back to work, including folks here in the campaign. We've been, hunkering down with this coronavirus for the most part, like everybody else has. But hey, now it's time to get out and get back to real life. And so I'm pretty excited about it. And
I know one of your ideas, and it seems like a lot of people are talking about this with the coronavirus, and with China and the role that China had here, and the secrecy in China, and the fact that the U.S. is so dependent on China right now. There are so many people who are trying to really not be so dependent on China, and you've got a plan for dealing with at least part of that, correct?
I do, and we've identified throughout this process that we have one big national security risk or big national security issue that we previously really, weren't making a big deal out of, weren't tracking. And, the president and members of the House and the Senate, that are going to be pushing this forward have identified this now as a national security risk, and that's our pharmaceutical processing. We cannot rely on China for our pharmaceuticals. That's a crazy thought if you think about it. We're going to have them, developing the medicines that we put in our bodies every day. That's just not a good idea. So there's a huge push right now across the country, and it's being led by the president. And I talked to the president, and I talked to Peter Navarro and some of the folks at the White House that are going to be involved in this a couple of weeks ago. And we have got to bring our pharmaceutical processing back to the United States. And I'm putting a plan together right now to be on the forefront of this. There's no reason why we shouldn't start right here in the panhandle of Texas. We have a great opportunity. This virus has been a huge economic burden for our region, but from the ashes, rise the phoenix, and there's opportunity here, and we need to seize on this opportunity. There's no better place to do this. Right here in Amarillo, we're centrally located. We have a railroad system. We have an airport. We have the interstate highway system. We have Texas Tech. We have West Texas A&M. University of Amarillo College. For crying out loud, we have a school of pharmacy here, a veterinary school of medicine. We are perfectly positioned to lead the fight on bringing pharmaceuticals back to the United States and specifically back to Texas and the Panhandle area. And so I'm putting a plan together to do that, and I think we'd be foolish if we didn't take advantage of this.
Right now, for those who may not know, how much of our pharmaceuticals are actually produced and manufactured in China?
So no one knows for sure. If you look it up, even the FDA doesn't know exactly what that number is, because some of it's not just the entire pharmaceutical package for a certain drug, but it's some of the active ingredients in the drug, but it's a substantial amount. And, I would argue that any amount is too much. We worry about, how many aircraft carriers they have and how many missiles they have and things of that nature. If they wanted to really wreak havoc on this country, they could just contaminate our drug supply and that would do more damage than all those things put together. Right,
or just cut us off. Forget about even contaminating it. They could just say, you're not going to get anything.
Right. If you're relying on insulin every day or something, they're producing part of our insulin, and they just say suddenly one day you can't have it anymore. You're right. It's just it's a risk that we cannot accept.
Well, and I think it would also go, very well for putting people back to work, and obviously, in Texas 13th, there have been a lot of folks who have been put out of work, not just with coronavirus, but even beforehand. This would do well at putting a lot of people back into good paying jobs.
It would actually, one of the things we talk about all the time here up in the Panhandle of Texas and North Texas, we're really relying on agriculture and oil and gas and things of that nature. Anything we can do to diversify our economy is going to make us stronger in the long run. This is a perfect opportunity to bring a large pharmaceutical production capability to the Panhandle and really diversify our economy so that next time something like this happens, it doesn't really have as big an impact on us as it does now. And I mean, it's a real pull here. I mean, we have low cost of living here. We have some of the lowest taxes in the country in the state of Texas, and that's been appealed for a while. But, we have the friendliest people in the world here, too. So there's a lot of reasons why people would want to live here if we had the industry in place to support them in the jobs.
Do you think that it would increase the cost of medicine if we were to do that here?
I don't think so. I think if we do this right, we can roll it into some of the reform of healthcare altogether. One of the things that the president's really worked hard on over the last 3 years, and it's one of the reasons why our economy is absolutely booming, is because he's made regulatory reform one of his primary objectives. He has just crushed regulations across business in this country. One of the areas that he hasn't done that yet, that he's actually looking at now, and he will address, is our healthcare industry. But we have lots and lots of regulations and standard operating procedures and all kinds of liability issues and stuff that are involved in pharmaceuticals and healthcare in general. And the president has realized now that we have got to go in and we've got to reform our healthcare in that regard in our pharmaceutical industry, and we've got to make it profitable for these people to produce their medications here. And we can do that. We can do it with tax incentives and everything else. And there's going to be like I said, this has been identified as a national security issue by the president and our leaders in D.C. So what that means is there's going to be a huge legislative push over the next year or so to make this happen. There's going to be a lot of federal money that follows that. And I want Amarillo, Texas, and the Panhandle of Texas and other parts of North Texas to be on the forefront of that.
Visiting with Dr. Ronny Jackson here on the Chad Hasty Show. I want to ask you something real quick about Amarillo and about coronavirus. We've seen the numbers spike in Amarillo. From what I've heard, a lot of that is tied back to the meatpacking industry in that area. As a physician, when you look at this, what is it about about those labs and about those plants that have just let coronavirus just explode, not only there in Amarillo and in the Panhandle, but all over the U.S.?
Well, I think, number one, first and foremost, there's a large immigrant population associated with these places, and they don't share our culture. They're a little bit culturally different, and, they don't make a lot of money, because they're immigrants here struggling to get by to some extent. They're in close quarters when they go home. They're living together in small living quarters. They're being bused from the living quarters to these plants in buses, kind of packed into these buses. So there's been a lot of issues, I think, that have led to that. It's just been kind of a petri dish, a setup for the virus to spread. We got the CDC here right now. I've talked to the CDC director a couple times over the last few days. I talked to the team leader here on the ground in Amarillo, and they're out hitting all the packing plants this week. They're going to come up with some recommendations at the end of the week on how they can the packing plants can better prepare themselves for this kind of stuff and prevent the spread of this virus. But I think it's something that's unique to the packing plants, and it's not just here in Texas. It started kind of all over the country in packing plants. But one of the things we have to do is we have to diversify with the packing plants as well. There are too many of these big packing plants that we rely on for production of our beef. We need a larger number of smaller packing plants so that if something happens in one of these big, huge packing plants, it doesn't shut down a quarter of the beef that's being provided to the country.
Visiting with Dr. Ronny Jackson. Before we let you go, you had mentioned that you're going to get the campaign back up and running and at full throttle here shortly, but that hasn't stopped. I guess some of your one of your opponents and I guess one of his supporters from launching a super PAC against you. Talk about that, because that's from outside of this area.
It sure is, yeah. My opponent, Josh Weingarner, has decided, for reasons I don't understand, to align himself with Will Hurd, who is part of the Texas delegation here, but in my mind, not really even a Republican. I mean, this guy, he votes, 51% of the time with the president. They're middle-of-the-road Democrats. that support the president better than that. This guy's for open borders and all kinds of stuff that people up here, just can't accept. He's close with Beto O'Rourke, and so he's put together a PAC, and he specifically, has come out supporting Josh Weingarten, and he said his PAC, one of the big objectives of his PAC is going to be to dump tons of money into defeating me in this district. And he's from down in El Paso. He's not even from up here. And so, I don't know. Strange bedfellows. There's somebody running up in the 13th Congressional District of Texas, the most conservative district in the entire United States. And I think it just points out that, I'm the true conservative in this race.
Well, Dr. Jackson, we always appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to visiting with you again here shortly.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate being on the show.
Thank you. That's Dr. Ronny Jackson up in the Texas 13th Congressional District, running in that Republican runoff there. And, of course, he's got the support of President Trump and a lot of conservatives, and God knows what he's talking about. That is for sure. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.